Right, over to you. This is your chance to ask a question. We have roving microphones. I have a glamorous assistant and Jeff Dodson. If you could wave your arms like mad, because the light is against us here, so it's quite difficult to see you, someone will bring a microphone towards you. If you could tell us who you are, and if your question is aimed at anyone in particular, then please make that clear. So, if you can start waving your arms. There's a man just down here. Someone is running toward you. It's Jeff. There you go. Such is life.
Hello. Lloyd Whiteley out of Billington. Just a quick question for David on DEFRA. I understand that 30% cutbacks. They've actually got no one in there involved in agriculture. So how can they really effectively represent our interests, and sort of where is it all heading?
That's a very pertinent question, Lloyd. At the moment, DEFRA are saying that the cuts will be back office and admin rather than frontline services. But nevertheless, if you talk to my colleagues who are in DEFRA on a regular basis, they will say that for the past 10 years or so, there's been a decline in the number of people that are available to handle real life issues, and also the training of the people to come into those jobs has not been good. As a classic example, there was one very good person in the fertilizer sector. He was transferred to the climate change area a few months ago, and there's a complete vacuum. It's hard not to be pessimistic about the future for what DEFRA can provide, but also I think it's an opportunity, because as there is a vacuum created, the sort of skills and knowledge transfer that we can offer through trained people, through FAR or basis or facts, gives an opportunity to replace what used to be done by government.
Flavio, can I pick up on something you said just at the end there, when you were talking about the future for the European budget? And certainly the impression was that it would be going the same way as our own department, in terms of there would be less money around. Is that what you're expecting?
Yes, there are certainly two issues. On the one hand, we have the discussion on the overall budget of the EU and how to allocate money and what share would go to agriculture. Now, it's not a secret that there has always been a pressure to move money away from agriculture to other sectors. Last time around, which means back in 2013, when this discussion took place, then it ended up with a budget for agriculture with all in all is not dramatically less than what it used to be. There are some cuts, but in percentage points this is not dramatic. And of course, with the number of challenges which are increasing and the number of objectives which are also increasing, it's certainly difficult to cope with this increasing number of challenges and objectives with the same budget, but still, I mean, agriculture, came out not so badly in terms of budget. And then there is a budget for resources, which is the budget within the Commission, within the European Commission, how much it is allocated to human resources. And here, certainly in terms of DG Agriculture, where I work, but also in terms of other services, there are cuts on human resources. And certainly what we are doing is actually to reallocate resources internally and try to make sure that we do it in the most efficient way. On the one hand, certainly it is always possible to increase efficiency. On the other hand, I'm afraid the type of problem David was alluding to is also a problem we are faced with in terms of sometimes, it's difficult actually to fill the posts because simply, there's been mobility or posts have been cut, so it's a very similar challenge that we're facing.
Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who's concerned about these cuts, both at national and then international level in EU, in DEFRA? Who thinks this is something they need to worry about for their business? Nobody at all? Oh, maybe one. Oh no, a few. So the rest of you are quite happy? Okay, right. Another question. Wave your hands in the air like you just don't care. Man at the back. Oh no, where are we going? Yes, great, thank you. Again, do tell us who you are.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to, first of all, thank David Caffall for, it's Richard Butler, I chair the Voluntary Initiative for Pesticides. I'd like to thank David for highlighting the threat to crop production from the loss of actives. In addition to the endocrine disruptors which you mentioned, we're also seeing a huge threat coming in the review of the next round under the Water Framework Directive, where a number of our key actives are shown by water companies to be under threat. I'd just like to ask whether David sees any light on this horizon, and also to turn it to Mr. Coturni, because one of the issues that concerns, and I should say that I actually farm in Wiltshire as well, so I have direct experience of what the loss of actives is actually meaning on farm, and the serious consequences which we saw with the withdrawal, for example, of the neonicotinoids that David mentioned. But I'd like to ask Mr. Coturni how we justify, in a European context, the withdrawal of so many products which have been used by our competitors elsewhere in the world, and we're then finding the same food produced with those actives that we're denied actually being imported into the European Union. Thank you.
David, you want to go first and then?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Richard. I think the first thing that I want to do is to say something which may surprise most of you. The water industry has been incredibly helpful and objective as we've addressed these issues about certain actives. We couldn't have asked for more rational, science-based support. So from that point of view, that's a very favourable situation. I suppose do I see light at the end of the tunnel? Yes, I do. But it's all dependent on whether or not we can get the industry to listen to the prevailing advice. And I think metaldehyde is a classic example. 2 years ago, everybody was saying, "Oh, metaldehyde's gone, no chance." But the stewardship that has been put in place, the sort of things that Andrew McShane's committee in AIC and that Hazel Doonan have done in terms of metaldehyde have made people realise that if they do stick to the new rules and the new guidelines, we can retain some of these materials. So I think the answer is a qualified yes. And in terms of linking to what the European view is, the fact still remains that about 70% of UK farmland is drained. Our next nearest competitor, if you will, is several tens of percent below that. Therefore, the UK does have a unique set of circumstances, and sometimes things like Water Framework Directive don't take those sort of things into account, so we have to work with it.
Flavio, the question for you is, why do we ban something and then import food which was grown using it?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's clearly an issue which has been discussed and debated for a long time. I'm not really the type of person, or I don't have enough expertise to judge where the balance can be defined, and this is certainly something which will have to be looked at in terms of, whether these new products actually comply with the standards, and whether the standards actually are fit for purpose, and it's not my role really to say that. I wanted to come back, if you allow me, to your previous question to the audience, whether or not, the audience was concerned about a lack of resources or reducing resources in terms of administrative resources, etc. And I would be concerned for the simple reason that we cannot argue that we need an evidence-based policy, but at the same time, and here I make the concrete example, cut resources in terms of collecting data. This is what is happening to my colleagues in DG Agri, which have all of a sudden been faced with a cut in budget in terms of collecting data, in particular in Eurostat, so that some of the indicators which we used to use actually in order to inform our policy and which we based ourselves in order to define the policies actually would be no longer there if these cuts are implemented. So again, we cannot devise a policy if we don't have indicators, if we don't have resources in order to collect the data, in order to define these indicators, we cannot do our work. And I think this is something which is not only of a concern to us, but I would certainly, if I was an operator, I would be extremely concerned if Europe and Brussels and also the national authorities are not able to define their policies on the basis of solid data, which basically means that we will be left blind in the face of the economic reality, and we cannot make the necessary and solid decisions.
I'm going to... Right. I think we had another question just there. Brilliant. And then
David Hutchinson's. Flavio, thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us today. Do you think we should revert back to a risk-based assessment rather than a hazard-based assessment? And if so, when can that be achieved?
Yeah, this is a very complex issue. Now, what I can say is that all the assessment we've been doing today are clearly focused on the need to achieve results which are good for operators, which make sense and which can actually deliver the results needed. I think that this is the most important objective. Now, I would move away from the debate between hazard and risk and trying to make sure that this objective is achieved, and then have a clear discussion between all the actors about whether and how this objective can be achieved in the best way. This is not something which can be decided in a few months. This is something which needs to be actually at the center of our discussion and in order to find the best solution for all actors. So I'm not giving you a reply because I'm not in a position to do so, but I think if we look at this objective, we need to make sure that we achieve it and we achieve it in the best way possible.
David.
Well, I've had the opportunity to tell you what my view is. It was very interesting to see the slides talking about the EU wants to increase its share of world trade, and also farmer productivity has to increase. And I'm delighted to hear those sort of words being said, because they have to be a part of the overall evaluation. And nobody, myself included, is asking for an easier path towards registration of any sort of agricultural input. But nevertheless, and the question I posed on the ammonia figure, I think is valid. It's to say, does the EU want to be competitive? Does it want to be best in class? Or does it want to be best in class by several orders of magnitude? And I think we all feel, across all sectors, in many instances, this desire to be better by several orders of magnitude is both unnecessary and doesn't help us to be competitive in a global sense.
Do you feel the need to be better by several orders of magnitude? Is that how it feels at DG Agri?
Well, it's again, I'm not an expert in this field, so please do not take what I say as it's just my personal opinion. I think we need to strike a balance between consumer concerns, between the need actually to make sure that these concerns are well addressed, and the need to be competitive on the world market, within Europe and on the world market. It's not easy, and I'm not saying that maybe we have found the best way or the best methods. We need to continue to discuss and to see whether there are alternatives, but so far I think this is actually the framework we have. We have to continue discussing, but I think that this is what we have today, and we have clearly to make sure that the margins of competitiveness we have have to be improved within this framework. And I do think that in order to reach this competitiveness, we have many other ways. For instance, I mean, making sure also on the policy side that the policy is well devised in order to increase our market share in third countries, but also in terms of actually not only in terms of policy, but also in terms of economic input. So we need to make sure that the technology, for instance, is transferred at the farm level, and make sure that this is done in a way which is also sustainable, so that the viability and sustainability of farming go well together. And I think there are margins in that respect without looking necessarily at other aspects of the problem.
A question just down here. And anyone else after that?
Thank you. Paul Temple, HDB, and farmer in Yorkshire. Flavio, you'll obviously be aware of the debate we now have on Europe. I have moved recently from being a pro-EU person to being undecided. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the way agricultural science is being treated. And you put a slide up there that called about improving the function of the food supply chain. But Europe can't deal with the issue of biotechnology. Now, I need the evidence that in the future we can make sensible European-wide decisions on this area. And I'm particularly concerned that new aspects of seed breeding are going to get dropped in the same area of legislation that is blocking the development and use of biotechnology. And we are being hugely hypocritical because we import 30 million tons of protein, 90% of which is biotech, and yet farmers that could grow it are excluded from it.
Well, again, you are pushing me to the limits, actually, in terms of competence, because I'm coming from DG Agriculture, and as you know, biotechnology is not my field of expertise. This is something which is covered by my colleagues in DG Sante. Having said that, what I can say is that on this issue in particular, there has been clearly a block of decision. I mean, Europe, when I say Europe, I mean the 28 member states have not been able to show a clear majority in favor of the approval of certain products. And at a certain point in time, it was clear that a decision was needed in order to unblock the situation and move forwards. It may well be that the decision taken does not clearly get the necessary approval or support by actors, by member states, by the parliament, by operators, etc. But at least it has, and this is my personal view, at least it has the merits of actually triggering the debate and exposing the difficulties of this subject. I mean, it was not possible to move on with the old system of approval because this system clearly doesn't work. So the decision actually to make member states more responsible for the type of decision that they want on GMO, it's, I think, a step in the direction of making member states responsible precisely for the type of decision they were not able collectively to take because of the lack of a clear majority. So something had to be done, and I think this was something which goes in the right direction. Now we will see where this leads.
Much more on the arguments for and against leaving or staying in Europe after the coffee break. With the coffee break in mind, let's take two quick questions. Firstly, the chap with the beard, and then we'll come to you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Matthew Dalton, Dalton Seeds. In light of the fact that a large portion of the CAP and the subsections around subsidies to farmers across Europe are effectively, one could construe a subsidy derived from inefficiency, would Mr. Coturni agree that because it creates effectively widespread market distortion in agriculture at a European and thereby a world level, would he surmise that effectively if the CAP didn't have to exist at all, that would be a preferable scenario?
I love the way that there's such easy questions you're getting today.
As a civil servant from DG Agri, I never in 21 years of my career had got an easy question. So, so all nasty questions are welcome, of course. No, this is not a particularly nasty one, in the sense that, well, several studies show that if we lack an agricultural policy in Europe, what we would have is a huge intensification in the most productive areas in Europe, with huge problems in terms of environmental effects and biodiversity. In terms of overall production, we would probably not be so different from what we are today, maybe slightly less production. So in terms of food security, it would probably be not so difficult in terms of addressing these in Europe. But we would have a massive problem in terms of public goods, in particular, because there will be intensification in this area of production. So this clearly shows that the option of not having a policy, it's not an option, not least also because of the variability which farmers would be exposed to. Now, a different issue is the first point you raised, whether or not actually the policy we have is the most effective one. And clearly, I mean, we continue to reflect on that. We will have to make sure clearly that compared or faced with the new challenges we have, whether the policy is fit for purpose, and the reflection is ongoing. But what I want to say is that really we cannot make a decision or a proposal on the future policy if we don't have a sound evaluation of the present reform. And I know that many people had, for instance, talking about an easy subject, which is greening, had many doubts about whether or not the 3 obligations on greening are effective or not. I know that there are many doubts about it. We should allow ourselves to have some time to assess the policy and make sure that we make the necessary decision whether there are things to be changed. It clearly concerns mostly direct payments, because on rural development, the fact that it's based on programming and member states have a lot of leeway to design the policy according to the specific needs on the ground, I think there is less of a concern, but the concern is really mainly on the way direct payments are distributed, and they constitute most actually of the budget of the CAP.
I think the best news I've heard today is that Commissioner Hogan is going to form a task force on agricultural markets. I understand that task force will report in just a few months. And there is a rumour running around that a certain Bedfordshire arable farmer is going to be the chairman of that, and I couldn't possibly comment, but Sir Peter Kendall phoned me at the weekend to apologise that he couldn't be here today because he's got to be in Brussels. That's great news. That's really great news.
You sure you're not a journalist in your other life? 2 and 2 together and possibly making 4.5. Right, finally. Thank you.
Rosie Khan, those of you wanting coffee will be very relieved that this is a quick comment and not a question. It's really in response to Charlotte's question and Flavio's response. I think we should be hugely worried about these prospective cuts in DEFRA. We in the fertiliser sector are very concerned that we no longer have anyone with nutrient knowledge in the department, and therefore unlikely to be funded. And as you saw from his comment about this RB 209, to those of us in the fertiliser industry, our manual, the fact that that was not going to be revised, and therefore advice going forward was going to be based on very old research, was hugely concerning to us. And that situation is going to continue. We're already hearing mutterings from some TSB projects that we're involved in, that if they don't get the outcomes they want, they might be looking back to the partners to claw back some of the fundings from those projects. Now, that is a hugely concerning development. So we should be lobbying and trying to help DEFRA get as much money as it can back into its